A ghostly longship cuts through the morning fog. The world you think you know about the Vikings is built on a lie. Those horned helmets and mindless berserkers are pure fantasy, inventions from a 19th century opera. We are about to journey deep into the past to uncover 30 incredible secrets that will completely reshape your understanding of the Viking Age. By the end of this, you will know the real story of these people, from their vast global travels to their surprisingly sophisticated culture. We will reveal how they navigated oceans without compasses and why a powerful queen might be buried in a ship filled with treasure. What did you think you knew about the Vikings that was completely wrong? That iconic image of a Viking warrior, a horned helmet gleaming under a harsh northern sun, is a complete fabrication. It is perhaps the most stubborn and widespread myth about them, yet it has absolutely no basis in historical fact. The truth is, no archaeological dig has ever uncovered a single Viking Age helmet with horns attached. The real headgear of a Norse warrior was designed for survival, not for show. They wore simple, practical helmets made of iron, sometimes with a guard to protect the nose and eyes, like the one found at Gegermund, in Norway. Many warriors likely fought with no metal helmet at all, trusting in a simple leather cap or just their own courage and thick hair. Think about the sheer physics of battle for a moment. A horned helmet would be a deadly liability. In the tight, brutal chaos of a shield wall, those horns would be perfect for catching an opponent's sword or axe, violently wrenching your head and neck with every blow. They would get tangled in shields, on ropes, in the rigging of a ship. They were impractical, unstable, and ultimately, a fantasy. So where did this idea come from? The blame lies not in the Dark Ages, but in the romantic 19th century. Artists and costume designers for grand operas, like Wagner's Ring Cycle, wanted to make their Viking characters look more dramatic, more primal and exotic. They drew on ancient Celtic and Germanic priestly garb, creating a spectacular, but entirely false, image that captivated the public imagination and never let go. So we must strip away that opera costume to see the real Viking warrior, a pragmatic fighter whose gear was built for one purpose only: efficiency in the face of steel and shield. But that pragmatic warrior, often imagined as grimy and unkempt, took surprising pride in his appearance. The second secret shatters another stereotype: the filthy barbarian. Vikings were, in fact, remarkably clean, far more so than many of their European contemporaries. Walk through a museum displaying Viking grave goods, and you will not just see swords and shields. You will find an entire personal hygiene kit laid out for the afterlife. There are intricately carved combs made from antler, delicate ear cleaners, and sharp razors, all testament to a culture that valued grooming. These were not rare luxuries, they were common possessions, found in the graves of both men and women, showing that cleanliness was a widespread social norm. This commitment to hygiene was woven into the very fabric of their week. They practiced regular bathing, so important that it named a day, Laugardagr. This translates directly to bathing day, and it is the root of our modern word, Saturday. So every Saturday, while others in Europe might have been content with far less, many Norsemen would have been washing up. And they did not just use water. They made and used soap, a strong, effective cleaner from animal fats and ash, but they had another, more surprising use for it. Vikings, particularly from certain regions, were known to lather this soap into their hair and beards, not just to clean, but to chemically bleach them. The soap would lighten their hair, often to a bright blonde. In their society, blonde hair was the height of fashion, a desirable trait that spoke of status and beauty. So the next time you picture a Viking, see not a dirty savage, but a well-groomed individual with clean, neatly combed hair, possibly lightened to a fashionable blonde, smelling of soap on a Saturday afternoon, ready for whatever the week might bring. Their world stretched from the frozen shores of North America to the bustling markets of the Middle East. While we often focus on their raids in Britain and France, the true scale of Viking exploration is almost unimaginable. They were the most far-ranging people of their age, and their ships touched continents we rarely associate with the Norsemen. Centuries before Columbus, a Viking ship, captained by Leif Erikson, made landfall on the coast of what is now Newfoundland, Canada. They called this place Vinland, establishing a small, short-lived settlement at a site we know today as El Ants Ox Meadows. This was not a mere accident, it was a deliberate voyage across the treacherous North Atlantic, a testament to their incredible seafaring skills. But their travels did not only go west. Look east, and you will find their tracks leading deep into the heart of Asia. They navigated the great river systems of Eastern Europe, their shallow draft longships perfect for the task. Viking traders and mercenaries, known there as the Rus, rode down the mighty Volga River. Their journey took them to the gates of Constantinople, the magnificent capital of the Byzantine Empire, a city so wealthy it must have seemed like a mirage. They went even further, reaching the Caspian Sea and establishing trade contacts that stretched all the way to the legendary city of Baghdad, the center of the Islamic world. This was not a random series of trips, it was a vast, interconnected network. The Vikings were the critical link that connected the Nordic world to the fabled Silk Road. In the cold north, they gathered luxury goods coveted in the south, precious furs from sable and fox, strong walrus ivory, and, tragically, slaves captured in their campaigns. They carried these goods east, where they traded them for something the Norse prized above almost all else: silver. Massive hordes of Islamic silver coins, called dirhams, have been found all across Scandinavia, buried in the soil, a silent testament to a trade route that spanned half the globe. They also brought back exotic spices, silks, and glass beads, items that would have been extraordinary rarities in a Scandinavian longhouse. So the next time you picture a Viking, do not see him only standing on an English beach. See him also haggling in a crowded market in Baghdad, or gazing at the golden domes of Constantinople, a true citizen of a world far wider than we ever knew. A Viking woman could not only inherit a vast farmstead, she could also stand up in a public assembly and declare her marriage over. This level of autonomy was almost unheard of in much of medieval Europe. Norse society, for all its tales of warrior men, granted its women a surprising and formidable set of legal rights. A woman could own property in her own name, separate from her husband. She could inherit wealth from her father if there were no sons, and she could even inherit from her own husband upon his death. This meant a widow could become an incredibly wealthy and powerful landowner, controlling the fate of entire communities. But perhaps her most striking power was the right to initiate a divorce. The process was straightforward and legally defined. If her husband hit her, if he failed to provide for the family, or if he was simply no longer a good match, she could demand a divorce. At the assembly, she would call witnesses to confirm her claims, and if successful, the marriage was dissolved. She was then entitled to walk away with her original dowry and the morning gift, the present her husband had given her the day after their wedding. This was not a quiet, shameful retreat. It was a legal reclaiming of her own economic independence. The true center of this female power was not the battlefield, but the longhouse. When her husband was away trading or raiding, which could be for years at a time, the Husfrija, the lady of the household, became the absolute commander of the home front. Her authority was total. She managed the entire farm's complex finances, from the harvest yields to the trade goods stored in the loft. She directed the labor of servants and slaves, ensuring every task from cheese making to building repair was completed. She was the chief executive officer of a self-sufficient economic enterprise, and her decisions determined whether the family would thrive or starve during the long, dark winters. This was not a passive role of waiting. It was one of active, decisive leadership. The ultimate testament to this female authority lies buried in a Norwegian field. In the year 834, a woman of immense importance was laid to rest in the Osberg ship. She was not merely placed in the ground, she was entombed within a stunning 21-meter-long seaworthy vessel, a vessel designed for a journey to the afterlife. Her burial chamber was a treasure chest of power. It contained a full set of farming tools, showing her command over agriculture. There were exquisite tapestries and 2 finely carved wooden carts, items of immense luxury and status. Most tellingly, she was buried with the remains of more than a dozen horses and cattle, a display of wealth that would have stunned her contemporaries. This was not the grave of a passive figurehead. This was the grave of a ruler, a Husfrija on a colossal scale, a woman who wielded economic, social, and likely political power that rivaled any chieftain. She forces us to completely rethink the Viking social structure, revealing a world where a woman's domain was a seat of genuine, formidable authority. Far from the fjords of home, some Norsemen found their fortune in the sweltering heat of Constantinople. These warriors became the legendary Varangian Guard, the elite personal protectors of the Byzantine emperor himself. Their journey to this golden city was an epic in its own right. They traveled from Scandinavia, navigating the treacherous river systems of what is now Russia, a route so vital it would one day bear their name. They portaged their ships between waterways, facing hostile tribes and brutal conditions, all for a single goal: to reach Miklagard, their name for Constantinople, which simply meant the great city. And when they finally arrived, the sight would have stolen their breath. The city's massive walls, its golden domes, and bustling harbors were unlike anything in the Nordic world. They were not there as tourists, they were there to enlist in the most prestigious mercenary unit of the age. The Varangian Guard was the emperor's last line of defense, his most trusted soldiers precisely because they were foreigners. With no local political ties or family alliances, their loyalty was not to the city's scheming nobles, but solely to the man who paid them, the emperor. Their signature weapon was not a sword, but a massive, two-handed battle axe. In the hands of a Norse warrior, this axe was a tool of terrifying power, capable of cleaving through armor, shields, and even horses with a single blow. Their reputation for ferocity in battle was absolute, and their presence in the throne room was a clear message to any potential usurpers. Cross the emperor, and you answer to his northern wolves. The rewards for this service were beyond anything they could have earned back home. They were paid in gold, in silks, and in prestige. They had the right to take their pick of the plunder from the palace treasury before any other soldier after a successful campaign, a privilege that made many of them extraordinarily wealthy. The most famous Varangian of all was Harald Hardrada. He served with distinction in the Guard, amassing a vast fortune before eventually returning to Norway to claim its throne, using his Byzantine wealth and battle-hardened reputation to become one of the most feared kings of his era. So these Vikings were not just raiders, they were international elite soldiers, whose service in a distant empire shaped the destiny of kingdoms back in their northern homeland. While the Varangian Guard wielded mighty axes in Byzantium, a different kind of mastery was being practiced back in the Viking homelands. We have been taught to see them only as destroyers, but they were also brilliant creators. Their world was filled with an artistry so complex and beautiful, it rivals the greatest works of the medieval period. This artistry was not a separate part of their culture. It was woven into the very objects they used every day, from the weapons of war to the combs for their hair. They developed a series of distinct artistic styles, each with its own name and character, that evolved over centuries. It began with the Osberg style, seen on the very ship we discussed earlier, with its gripping beasts and intricate animal patterns. This evolved into the Bora style, with its symmetrical knots, and then the Jellinge style, featuring a single, ribbon-like animal interlaced with itself. Later came the Mammon style, a more naturalistic and fleshy animal form, often inlaid with silver. This then gave way to the Ringerike style, with its grand, sweeping tendrils and leaf motifs, and finally, the elegant late Ernst style, where slim, stylized animals serpentine in a graceful, battling dance. These were not just random decorations, they were a visual language of power and prestige. Nowhere is this more evident than in their legendary swords. Forging a Viking sword was an almost magical process. They used a technique called pattern welding, a method of incredible skill and patience. The smith would take multiple rods of iron and steel, each with different carbon contents, twist them together while red hot, and then hammer weld them into a single, solid blade. This created a core that was both strong and flexible, a blade that would not shatter in combat. After the welding, the smith would painstakingly file grooves into the blade and inlay them with twisted rods of iron and phosphoric iron, which turned a contrasting black when etched. The result was not just a lethal weapon, but a work of art. When finished, the blade revealed a swirling, watery pattern, a mesmerizing ripple effect known as the sword's soul. This process was so difficult that the swords themselves were given names. like leg biter or flame of battle, and were often passed down through generations as priceless heirlooms. And the raw material for many of these masterpieces came from a surprisingly humble source, bog iron. Vikings did not have deep mines instead. They harvested iron from peat bogs, where it formed in lumps called nodules. They would smelt this bog iron in clay furnaces, a laborious and smoky process that produced the valuable metal from which their world was built. But their craftsmanship extended far beyond the forge. Viking traders brought back silica and soda from their travels, and their artisans used these to create stunning, multicolored glass beads. They would layer different colors of glass, then stretch and twist them while hot to create intricate patterns, millefeury, a technique thought to be lost since the Roman era. A Viking woman's wealth and status were displayed around her neck in a string of these vibrant, beautifully crafted beads. The ultimate expression of this artistic spirit can be seen in objects like the Lewis chessmen, those haunting walrus ivory figures with their solemn, thoughtful faces, and the massive gelling runestone in Denmark. This great stone, raised by King Harald Bluetooth, is covered on all three sides with a magnificent carving of a beast tangled with a serpent, all in the elegant urn style, and it proclaims the king's achievements, including the conversion of the Danes to Christianity. It is a royal billboard, carved with the skill of a master artist, so the next time you hear the word Viking, do not just think of a raised axe. Think also of the smith, sweat gleaming in the firelight, patiently twisting steel to create a blade with a swirling sole, or the glassblower, carefully crafting a tiny, beautiful bead that would catch the light 1,000 years later. The same culture that produced intricate sword patterns and delicate glass beads also gave rise to its most terrifying figures, the berserkers and the Ulfhidnar. These were not ordinary soldiers, but something far more primal and unsettling. They were said to fight in a wild, trance-like fury, a state so intense they felt no pain and feared no enemy. According to the sagas, they would gnaw on the rims of their shields, howl like animals, and possess a strength that seemed almost supernatural. The berserkers were the bear warriors, while the Ulfhidnar wore the skins of wolves. They were a small, elite cult, the ultimate shock troops unleashed to break an enemy line before the main battle even began. Their very presence was a weapon of psychological terror. But what was the true source of this infamous battle fury? One of the most persistent theories points to a potent and dangerous ritual. It is suggested they consumed the fly agaric mushroom with its distinctive red cap and white spots. This mushroom contains powerful psychoactive compounds that can induce states of extreme agitation, distorted perception, and a feeling of invincibility. In the right dose, it could plausibly send a warrior into a frenzied state, numb to injury and consumed by rage. Yet this is far from certain. Other scholars argue the frenzy was a learned psychological condition, a form of self-induced hysteria achieved through chanting, drumming, and pure mental conditioning. A battle focus so absolute it shut out everything else, including the instinct for self-preservation. It could also have been the result of intense, ritualized training and a kind of crowd frenzy, where the energy of the shield wall amplified their ferocity. Whatever the catalyst, their role was specific and brutal. They were not the standard Viking fighter, but a specialized force used to create chaos. Imagine the horror of facing a line of men who seemed more beast than human, who charged without regard for their own lives, their animal pelts making them seem like monsters unleashed from the old forests. This terrifying practice, however, was likely dying out by the end of the Viking Age, even outlawed in some places, as the chaotic fury of the bear warrior had no place in the more structured kingdoms and Christian armies that were emerging. Behind the gleaming silver and exquisite craftsmanship lay a brutal economic engine. The Viking world was powered by a vast and ruthless slave trade. These individuals, known as thralls, were the foundation of the Norse economy, and their capture and sale created a network of human suffering that spanned continents. In bustling trade centers like Hedeby in Denmark or Dublin in Ireland, the air would have been thick with the sounds of commerce and the desperate cries of the enslaved. The merchandise on offer was human. People torn from their homes in the British Isles, Ireland, and the Slavic lands of Eastern Europe were paraded and inspected, their lives reduced to a price. A strong young man or a skilled woman could fetch a high value, often paid in the very thing the Norse craved, silver. This was the dark flip side of their expansive travels. Raiding was not just about plundering monasteries for gold and relics, it was primarily about capturing people. A healthy captive was often more valuable than a chest of loot, a renewable resource that could be traded again and again. The flow of this human misery directly fueled the flow of wealth into Scandinavia. The massive hordes of Arabic dirhams, those silver coins found by the thousands, were largely acquired through this grim exchange. Viking traders would transport their human cargo down the rivers of Russia to markets in the Byzantine Empire and the Islamic Caliphate. There, they would exchange slaves for immense quantities of silver, which they then carried back north. This silver did not just sit in chests, it circulated, paying for everything from the iron for a farmer's tools to the glass beads for a chieftain's wife. It financed the construction of great longships and the forging of pattern-welded swords. The entire system, from the humblest farm to the most powerful chieftain, was deeply entangled in this brutal business. It forces a difficult realization that the cultural and artistic achievements of the Viking Age were built, in no small part, upon the backs of countless unnamed and forgotten souls. Crossing the North Atlantic meant sailing into a world without landmarks, where the sea and sky became a disorienting void. To conquer these empty waters, the Vikings developed a suite of navigation skills so advanced they bordered on the magical, all without a magnetic compass. Their most legendary tool was the Solsteiner, the sunstone. This was not a mythical gem, but a real crystal, likely a piece of calcite or cordierite. On a completely overcast day, when the sun was utterly invisible to the naked eye, a navigator could hold this crystal up to the sky and rotate it. The magic was in the light itself. The crystal would polarize the diffused sunlight, changing in color or brightness depending on its alignment. By finding the point where the light through the stone was consistent, the navigator could pinpoint the exact location of the hidden sun, establishing a reliable east-west line even in the grayest gloom. This was not guesswork, it was sophisticated applied physics, but the sunstone was just one tool in a vast mental library. Viking sailors were master readers of the natural world. They knew that certain species of seabirds, like puffins and guillemots, would fly out to sea to feed in the morning and return to land in the evening. Spotting these birds and noting their flight direction could point the way to unseen shores. They learned to interpret the patterns of ocean swells, feeling how the boat moved differently when waves reflected from a distant coastline. They watched for the telltale blow of whales, which often fed in productive waters near land, and at night they steered by the stars, using the unchanging North Star, Polaris, as their fixed point in the turning sky. The final piece of their navigational genius was a simple wooden disc known as a sun compass. Archaeologists found a fragment of one in Greenland. This was a calibrated disc with a central gnomon, a small pin that cast a shadow. As the sun moved across the sky, the shadow's tip would trace a path. By marking where that shadow fell at different times, a navigator could not only find north and south, but could actually plot his latitude, knowing exactly how far north he had sailed. This combination of cutting-edge technology and ancient, accumulated wisdom allowed them to thread the needle across thousands of kilometers of open ocean, reaching lands they knew only from stories. It was this mastery of the unseen, this ability to read the whispers of nature, that truly made the Viking Age possible. That same mastery of the sea that brought them to new worlds also provided a dinner table of stunning variety. The 10th secret reveals a Viking diet that was far more diverse and nutritious than the stereotype of a meat-gorging barbarian. While they certainly ate beef, pork, and mutton from their farms, their daily meals were a clever and balanced exploitation of their entire environment. The cold northern waters were their greatest pantry. They were expert fishermen, hauling in cod, herring, and salmon, and they also hunted seals and even whales when the opportunity arose. But their true genius lay not just in catching food, but in preserving it. They developed methods that turned the seasonal abundance of summer into a lifeline for the dark winter and long sea voyages. They dried fish on vast wooden racks until it was hard as wood, a protein-rich staple that could last for years. They smoked meat and fish over fires,
infusing it with flavor and creating a barrier against spoilage. Perhaps their most ingenious technique was fermentation. They would bury fish in pits and let it ferment for months, creating a pungent, potent paste that was packed with energy and nutrients. On land, their farms were busy centers of production. They grew hardy grains like barley and rye, which they ground into flour for dense, dark bread or boiled into a thick, sustaining porridge. They cultivated cabbages, onions, peas, and beans, adding crucial vitamins and fiber to their diet. In the wild, they foraged for a bounty of berries, apples, plums, and nuts, nature's sweet and nutritious gifts. And from their livestock, they gained a vital and versatile resource, dairy. They made butter and cheese, but their most famous creation was skyr. This was a thick, yogurt-like cheese, packed with protein and with a pleasant, tangy flavor. It was a staple food that could be eaten fresh or stored, providing essential sustenance whether a person was working a field or sailing an ocean. So the Viking strength was not born from a simple diet of meat and mead, but from a sophisticated understanding of how to harness every possible source of nutrition from their challenging world. Beyond the clang of steel and the creak of oars lay a hidden world, one governed by forces unseen. The 11th secret pulls back the veil on Viking magic, a practice known as Seidr. This was not simple superstition, but a complex and powerful form of sorcery, a craft so potent that even the all-father god Odin himself was its master. The sagas tell us that Odin learned the secrets of Seidr from the goddess Freyja, the commander of the afterlife. This connection immediately tells us something profound, that this magic was deeply intertwined with fate, prophecy, and the feminine. The primary practitioners of Seidr were women known as Völvas. These were not witches hiding in the woods, but respected and often feared professionals who traveled from farm to farm. A Völva was a welcome, if intimidating, guest. When she arrived, the entire household would prepare a special feast in her honor, for she held the power to see what was to come. Her purpose was to perform rituals, to cast her consciousness into a trance and foretell the future for the community. Would the harvest be good? Would a child survive the winter? When would the men return from their voyage? Her answers could dictate the entire year's planning. Her authority was visible in her tools. She carried a staff of power, often intricately carved, which was the symbol of her office and a focus for her magic. She wore amulets and pouches filled with herbs and charms, and she would sit on a special high seat, a platform that elevated her closer to the realms of the spirits. Her rituals involved chanting sacred songs, Galdr, whose rhythms and words were believed to shape reality itself. This practice, however, existed in a curious space within Viking society. While it was a source of immense power, it was also viewed with a certain unease. Seidr often involved manipulating the wills of others, and this was seen as unmanly, a blurring of strict gender roles. For a man to practice Seidr was to risk being labeled ergi, a term implying a lack of masculine honor. This is why Odin's mastery of it is so striking in the myths. It shows a god willing to cross every boundary, to embrace any form of knowledge, no matter how socially transgressive, to gain an edge. So the Völva stands as a formidable figure, a woman who wielded a power that could make chieftains nervous, a traveler between the world of the living and the threads of fate, whose chants and trances were as vital to the community's survival as any warrior's strength. Buried in a sand dune on the Isle of Lewis, a horde of 93 small figures waited silently for 700 years. Discovered in 1831, the Lewis chessmen are among the most captivating and mysterious artifacts of the Norse world. Each piece is a masterfully carved sculpture from walrus ivory and a few from whale tooth, depicting kings, queens, bishops, and grim warders biting their shields in the classic berserker rage. But why were they hidden there, on that remote Scottish island? The leading theory suggests they were the stock of a merchant traveling from Norway, perhaps buried for safekeeping during a sudden crisis, a storm or a threat, and then never recovered. The carver's identity is lost, but art historians point strongly to the Norwegian city of Trondheim, a known center for expert ivory workers. The style is unmistakably Norse, yet they were found in Scottish soil, a perfect symbol of the vast cultural network the Vikings had woven. What makes these pieces so unforgettable, however, is not their mystery, but their humanity. They are not stern, impersonal icons. The kings, with their long, braided hair and flowing mustaches, sit with a look of weary, resigned authority, one hand on their sword as if burdened by the weight of rule. The queens, often called the warders, rest their chins on their hands, their faces etched with a profound and melancholic thoughtfulness. And then there are the warders, the rook pieces, who are not castle towers but foot soldiers. They are carved in the act of biting the tops of their shields, their eyes wide with a kind of frantic, almost comic fury. This single detail transforms them from abstract game pieces into living, breathing warriors caught in the heat of battle frenzy. These expressions offer a rare, intimate window past the legends and the loot, showing us a people with a clear sense of humor and a delight in character. They reveal that Viking Age artisans did not just create symbols of power. They carved personality, emotion, and a touch of whimsy, reminding us that behind the history were individuals who enjoyed a quiet game of strategy, pushing these very pieces across a board in the firelight. A ship's soul was not in its sail, but in its keel. That long, timber backbone running the length of the hull was the single most important innovation in Viking naval engineering. It acted like a deep fin, biting into the water to prevent the ship from sliding sideways with the wind, providing a stability that allowed them to sail across the wind, not just with it. This, combined with a revolutionary method of construction, created vessels that were both impossibly strong and beautifully flexible. The Vikings did not build their ships with smooth, edge-joined planks. Instead, they used the clinker-built technique, where each long plank overlapped the one below it, fastened with iron rivets. Imagine holding your hands flat, fingers together, and then sliding one hand so your fingers overlap the other. That is the core principle. This created a hull that could twist and flex with the motion of the waves, riding over swells like a sea serpent rather than fighting them. A clinker-built ship did not risk shattering in a storm. It would simply bend, groaning and creaking as it absorbed the ocean's immense power. This flexibility was its greatest strength. The design was a masterpiece of dual purpose. That deep, ocean-going keel was matched with a uniquely shallow draft. A fully loaded longship needed less than a meter of water to float. This meant it could sail right up onto a beach for a raid, and more importantly, it could travel far inland via the shallow rivers of Europe and Russia, carrying warriors and traders deep into the heart of a continent. The iconic square sail, woven from heavy wool and often coated with animal fat to repel water, was a powerful engine, but it was the ship's steering that gave it such precise control. They used a single, large steering oar mounted on the right-hand side of the stern, the starboard side, a term that literally means steering side and has entered our language today. Not all Viking ships were the same. They were master craftsmen of specialized tools for specific jobs. The most famous was the Scathe, or warship. These were long, narrow, and built for speed and intimidation, with room for dozens of rowers and a fearsome dragon or serpent-head prow designed to strike terror into those watching from the shore. For crossing the open Atlantic, they relied on the Nar, the cargo ship. This vessel was shorter, broader, and deeper-bellied, a workhorse designed to carry settlers, their livestock, and all their worldly goods across the ocean to places like Iceland and Greenland. It was the Nar's robust design that made the colonization of the North Atlantic possible. And for everyday life, there was the humble fairing, a small, four-oared boat used for fishing and local transport around the fjords, the family car of the Viking Age. From the terror of the Scathe to the endurance of the Nar, each ship was a perfect solution to a specific challenge, a floating piece of their genius carved from oak and iron. A king's boast carved in stone can echo for 1,000 years. In the small town of Jelling, Denmark, 2 massive runestones stand as a permanent revolution in granite. The smaller one was raised by King Gorm the Old in memory of his wife, Thyra, calling her Denmark's adornment, but it is the larger stone, erected by his son, Harold Bluetooth, that truly changed history. This 3-sided monument is often called Denmark's birth certificate, and for good reason. Its runic inscription is a masterpiece of political messaging, a royal press release carved for eternity. It reads, King Haraldr ordered this monument made in memory of Gormr, his father, and in memory of Thieve, his mother, that heralder who won for himself all of Denmark and Norway and made the Danes Christian. In just a few lines, Harold makes three colossal claims, cementing his legacy as a unifier and a converter. But the words are only half the story. The stone's imagery is a breathtaking act of cultural fusion. One side features a great, serpentine beast locked in a struggle with a lion, a classic motif from the Old Norse animal style, the very art of the pagan past. On another side, we see the figure of Christ, not crucified and suffering, but triumphant, entangled in what appear to be branches and vines. This is not a rejection of the old ways, but a deliberate merging. Harold Bluetooth was a pragmatist. He understood that to rule a united kingdom, he needed a unified faith, and Christianity, with its structured church and links to powerful European empires, offered immense political advantages. His conversion was likely as much about diplomacy as divinity. By placing the image of Christ alongside the pagan beast, he sent a clear message to his people. The new God does not destroy the old world. He conquers and encompasses it. The cross and the serpent become one intertwined symbol of royal power. This stone was far more than a memorial. It was a piece of strategic propaganda placed at the very heart of his royal seat, ensuring every chieftain and farmer who saw it understood a new order had arrived, mandated by their king and blessed by a new god. The gelling stones marked the precise moment when the Viking Age began to transform into the Christian kingdoms of medieval Scandinavia, a turning point in stone, forged by a king who knew that the story you tell can be as powerful as the army you command. The same hands that gripped the oars of raiding longships also laid the foundations for great cities. Far from being mere nomadic pirates, the Vikings were prolific urban planners, establishing trade hubs that grew into some of the most important centers of the medieval world. Take Dublin, a name that itself comes from the Old Norse Dyflin, meaning black pool. What began as a simple winter camp for raiders in the 9th century rapidly transformed into a sprawling, bustling town. It became the epicenter of the Viking slave trade in the West, a place where captives from Ireland and beyond were gathered and sold, but it was also a hive of diverse industry. Walk through its streets and you would hear the sounds of shipwrights, comb makers, and blacksmiths, all operating in specialized workshops. Archaeologists have found evidence of everything from amber and jet working to textile production, proving it was a true economic powerhouse, not just a raider's den. Across the sea, the Viking settlement of Jorvik, modern-day York in England, was even more immense. It grew to be one of the largest and most densely populated cities in all of Britain. The Coppergate Dig in York revealed an astonishingly preserved world, a street where woodworkers, leatherworkers, and metalsmiths plied their trades. The soil, waterlogged and airless, preserved everyday objects in stunning detail, from hundreds of shoes and countless pieces of worked bone to the remains of buildings and even insect life, giving us a vivid, almost living snapshot of a thriving Viking Age metropolis. But their urban ambitions stretched far beyond the British Isles. In the heart of Europe, at the base of the Jutland Peninsula, stood Hedeby. This was a true crossroads, a planned trading town protected by a massive semicircular rampart. Goods from across the known world passed through its harbor, from Frankish swords and glass beakers to Slavic pottery and Arabic silver. It was a melting pot of languages and cultures, a strategic node in a global commercial network. Most impactful of all was their eastern expansion. Viking traders and chieftains, the Rus, traveled down the Dnieper River and established a settlement at a strategic high point. That settlement would evolve into the city of Kiev. From this base, they unified the surrounding Slavic tribes, laying the administrative and military groundwork for the Kievan Rus state, the very entity that would eventually evolve into Russia and Ukraine. The legacy of these city builders forces a complete re-evaluation. The Viking Age was not an era of pure destruction. It was also a period of dynamic creation, where strategic camps grew into capitals, and trading posts became the foundations for nations. A shattered wooden disc, unearthed from the ruins of a Norse convent in Greenland, holds the ghost of a sunbeam. This artifact, known as the Unartak disc, was long considered a simple decorative object. But a closer look revealed a series of mysterious, faint lines carved along its edge. Researchers now believe this humble piece of wood is one of the Viking Age's most sophisticated navigational instruments, a sun compass designed to conquer the disorienting light of the far north. Imagine the challenge a navigator faced sailing near the Arctic Circle during the summer solstice. The sun would never truly set, circling the sky in a perpetual, dizzying loop. A standard sundial would be useless, its shadow spinning in a constant, confusing arc. The Unartok disk was the solution. At its center was a gnomon, a central pin that would cast a shadow. But this was not a passive instrument. The navigator would have been an active participant, calibrating the disk to the specific day and their specific latitude. They would likely have rotated the disk throughout the day, marking where the tip of the shadow fell at different times. The curved lines etched on the fragment are thought to be hyperbolas, a set of paths that the shadow's tip would follow on specific dates. Once these paths were established for the voyage, the compass became a reliable guide. Even on a rocking longship, a navigator could place the disk level, watch where the shadow crossed the predetermined curve, and instantly find his cardinal directions. To test this theory, modern researchers built a precise replica of the Unartok disk and took it to the Arctic Ocean. The results were stunning. Using only the wooden compass and the midnight sun, they were able to determine north with an accuracy of within a single degree. This was not a crude guessing game, it was a form of precise nautical science. This small, broken disk proves that Viking navigation was a symphony of tools, both natural and man-made. The sunstone found the hidden sun on a cloudy day, and the sun compass tracked its endless path on a clear one. Together, they turned the empty, terrifying ocean into a chartable highway. Their competitive spirit burned just as fiercely around a game board as it did on a battlefield. For the Vikings, play was a serious business, a vital part of life that honed the mind and body for the challenges of their world. One of their most cherished games was Nefatafel, the King's Table. This was not a simple pastime, but a complex game of strategy that mirrored the realities of their time. The board was a grid, and the pieces were set in a cross pattern. One player controlled a king piece and his small band of defenders, positioned in the center of the board. The other player commanded a larger force of attackers, surrounding them on all four sides. The goal was stark and clear. The attacker had to capture the king, preventing his escape to the board's edge, while the defender had to maneuver the king to safety. Every game was a miniature drama of invasion and survival, a mental exercise in tactical thinking and foresight. Finding a Nefatafel board, often made of finely carved wood or stone, in a grave was a clear sign of status. It showed the world that this was a person of strategic mind, a leader who practiced the art of war even in times of peace. But when they stepped away from the board, their games turned physical. Glima was their signature form of wrestling, a sport so central to their culture that it was considered a core skill for any free man. This was not a brawl. It was a disciplined contest with specific rules and grips, focused on agility, balance, and using an opponent's momentum against them. The goal was to throw your opponent to the ground, proving not just brute strength, but cleverness and control. A man skilled in Glima was respected, for his prowess on the wrestling mat translated directly to his effectiveness in the close-quarters chaos of a shield wall. For those testing pure power, there was stone lifting. They sought out massive, oddly shaped boulders, their surfaces worn smooth by countless grips. Lifting such a stone was a public demonstration of raw strength, a feat that would be remembered and celebrated in local lore, enhancing a man's reputation for generations. Perhaps the most brutal of their sports was horse fighting. This was a grisly spectacle where two stallions were set against each other, often incited by the presence of a mare. The horses would bite and kick ferociously while their owners stood by, urging them on. The purpose was not just entertainment. A victorious stallion was a huge financial and social asset, and the conflict between owners over the outcome of these fights was a common source of disputes that could, and often did, escalate into full-blown feuds. These games were far more than leisure. They were the training ground for war, the courtroom for settling honor, and the stage upon which a Viking built the one thing that mattered most, his reputation. 500 years of history in Greenland ended not with a bang, but with a slow, chilling silence. The fate of the Norse settlers who thrived there for centuries is one of the Arctic's greatest enigmas. These were not a failed colony of beginners. They were the descendants of the very explorers who braved the Atlantic, masters of a harsh environment. Yet by the mid-15th century, their settlements were empty, the great halls and stone churches left to the wind and snow. So what happened to them? The leading suspect is a relentless, global shift in climate known as the Little Ice Age. This was not a single cold winter, but a centuries-long deepening freeze that gripped the North Atlantic. Summers grew shorter and wetter, winters longer and more brutal. The sea ice expanded, choking the fjords for more of the year and cutting off vital seal hunting grounds. On land, the already thin soil became too cold for the pasture grass their cattle needed to survive. A diet that once relied on beef and dairy slowly crumbled, forcing an overdependence on seal meat, a less reliable and more dangerous resource. This environmental pressure was compounded by a catastrophic economic collapse. Greenland's main exports were luxury goods, walrus ivory and narwhal tusks, sold as unicorn horns in Europe. But as the climate worsened, the shipping lanes became more treacherous and less frequent. At the same time, European markets were flooded with cheaper, higher-quality elephant ivory from Africa, making the Greenlandic trade virtually worthless. They were suddenly isolated, poor, and starving, cut off from the trade networks that supplied them with essential iron, timber, and grain. There is also evidence of a growing tension with their neighbors, the Thule people, the ancestors of the modern Inuit. The Norse called them Skraelings. While there may have been periods of trade, the sagas also tell of conflicts. The Thule, with their superior Arctic technology, were far better adapted to the changing world. They built swift, covered kayaks and umiaks for hunting in the icy waters, and used toggle harpoons that could securely fasten to large marine mammals like whales. The Norse, stubbornly clinging to their European identity, continued to rely on farming methods and open boats that were becoming useless in the new climate. This cultural inflexibility may have been their ultimate undoing. They never adopted the skin clothing, the hunting techniques, or the semi-nomadic lifestyle that allowed the Thule to not just survive, but thrive in the deepening cold. So did they die out? The grim evidence from Middens, the ancient garbage dumps, shows the bones of the settlers' small, stunted cattle, and even of their hunting dogs, signs of desperate famine. Yet another possibility is that they did not all perish. Some may have slowly assimilated with the Thule people, their distinct Norse identity dissolving over generations through marriage and cultural exchange. The most tantalizing theory is that the last Greenlanders, facing the end, used the last of their strength and their ancestral knowledge of shipcraft to sail west, attempting to rediscover the lost Viking settlements in North America. A final, desperate voyage into the mist of legend. The silence they left behind is a haunting lesson in the fragility of even the most resilient societies when the world they built for themselves suddenly changes. The runes carved into a Viking amulet held a power far beyond mere words. This was a script imbued with magic, a sacred alphabet where every character hummed with divine energy. The runic system, known as the Futhark after its first 6 letters, was not created by scribes but discovered by a god. The myths tell us that Odin, the All-Father, hung for 9 days and 9 nights on the world tree Yggdrasil, pierced by his own spear, sacrificing himself to himself. His reward was a shattering vision, the knowledge of the runes. He grasped them, and in that moment, he gained the power not just to write, but to shape fate, to heal the sick, to blind an enemy's sword, and to wake the dead. This origin story reveals the true Viking belief that runes were a cosmic force, a key to unlocking the hidden mechanisms of the world. We find their power etched into the most ordinary objects. A small piece of bone might be inscribed with a desperate prayer for a safe journey, or a love spell intended to bind the heart of another. A simple wooden stick could bear a message as poignant as any modern letter, a runic declaration that said, "Kiss me." These were not casual graffiti. They were active incantations, an attempt to bend reality through the power of the carved word. Yet runes also served the most mundane purposes. A comb might have the plain inscription, "Thorgrim owned this comb," a straightforward claim of property. A stone could mark a grave, telling travelers that a brave man lies here. This duality is what makes runes so fascinating. They existed in both the magical and the everyday, a constant reminder that for the Vikings, the boundary between the physical world and the world of spirits was thin, and could be crossed with the right symbol, carved with intent. A great skald could wield words with the same devastating force as a champion warrior swung his axe. In the halls of Viking chieftains and kings, the art of poetry was not mere entertainment, it was a form of power, a currency of reputation, and a sacred craft. The masters of this art were the skalds, poet-historians whose complex verses were as prized as any chest of silver. A truly gifted skald, one who could compose a flawless, intricate poem on the spot to honor his lord, could earn immense wealth, receiving rings of gold, fine weapons, and a place of honor at the right hand of power. Their poetry was the living memory of the people, preserving the deeds of heroes and the lineages of kings for generations. To understand their genius, you must grasp the kennings, the metaphorical riddles that are the heart of skaldic verse. A kenning is a condensed metaphor, a poetic puzzle that describes one thing in terms of another. A ship was never just a ship, it was the horse of the sea. Blood was not merely blood, but the dew of swords or the surf of wounds. A warrior became a feeder of ravens, and gold became the fire of the dragon. This was a complex, elusive language, a code shared between the poet and his audience, where the beauty lay in the cleverness of the imagery. Listen to the rhythm and force of a verse from the saga of Harold Hardrada, describing the chaos of the Battle of Stamford Bridge. Weapons resounded, skulls were split, wounded men fell heavily to the ground. The spear points bit, the shields were shattered, the axes crashed on the helmets of men. Can you hear the relentless, driving beat, like the fall of hammers on shields? This was not a gentle recitation, it was a verbal reenactment of battle, designed to make the hearth fire flicker and the listeners feel the shock of steel. In a world without writing, these poems were living histories, and the skald who held them in his memory was a keeper of souls, proving that for the Vikings, the greatest plunder was not always silver, but a story perfectly told. High on a desolate cliff on the remote island of Kingatorsuaq, a small, flat stone bears a message from the very edge of the world. Discovered in the 1830s, the Kingatorsuaq runestone is one of the most perplexing artifacts from the Norse Greenlandic colonies. Its inscription is short, just 3 lines, but it speaks volumes about the incredible distances these people traveled. Carved into the slate, the runes read, Erlinger Sigvatsson, Bjarni Thordarson, and Eindridi Oddsson raised this mound on the Saturday before Regation Day, and the rest is lost, the stone broken. That single sentence is a time capsule. Regation Day is a Christian holiday in late April. The year, calculated from the runic characters, is thought to be 1333. This places the message near the very end of the Norse settlement in Greenland, a time when the colonies were struggling and the climate was turning against them. So what were 3 men doing on this tiny, uninhabited island, far north of any known farmstead? They were not lost. The name suggests they were Norse hunters, not explorers on a first voyage. Their presence so far north was likely driven by the same desperation that was gripping their entire society. As the weather grew colder and their farms failed, the Greenlanders were forced to push further into the high Arctic in a desperate search for valuable resources. They would have been hunting walrus for their ivory and narwhal for their precious tusks, the very trade goods that were the lifeblood of their dying economy. This small stone, then, is not a marker of triumphant exploration, but a record of a grim, necessary expedition. It is a testament to human endurance, a prayer carved in stone by men operating at the absolute limit of their known world, a haunting echo from a civilization that was, quite literally, running out of room. A Viking trader in the market at Hedeby did not need gold coins to make a purchase. He could pay with a string of vibrant blue glass beads, each one a tiny, shimmering piece of captured sky. For decades, we believed these beautiful objects were purely imports, brought back from the great cities of the East. But a discovery in the ancient town of Ribe, Denmark, has completely rewritten that story. Archaeologists sifting through the soil uncovered something far more telling than finished beads. They found the debris of their creation. There were fragments of raw, imported glass cullet. the broken pieces ready to be melted down, and the hardened droplets of spilled glass that are the unmistakable signature of a workshop. The Vikings were not just passive consumers of luxury. They were active, sophisticated glassmakers, producing these coveted items right in the heart of Scandinavia. They possessed the technical skill to layer different colored glass, then stretch and twist the molten rods to create intricate patterns, a technique known as millefeury. This local production transformed beads from rare treasures into a form of standardized currency, a portable bank for a people always on the move. A single high-quality bead could be worth the same as a farm animal, its value recognized from the icy fjords of Norway to the sun-baked markets of Baghdad. These beads, along with other northern luxuries like glossy amber and thick furs from fox and sable, became the engine of a vast economic network. They were the primary goods the Norse offered in exchange for the one thing they truly craved: silver. The Islamic dirhams and Byzantine silks that filled their chests were not just given as gift or taken as plunder. They were earned through a complex and thriving trade system that connected the cold north to the warm south. The humble glass bead, once seen as a simple trinket, reveals a Viking Age that was deeply commercial, artistically brilliant, and astonishingly interconnected. The name Russia itself holds a Viking secret. It echoes the Rus, a people who began not as Slavs, but as Scandinavian voyagers, primarily Swedes, sailing east in search of fortune. Their journey was an inland odyssey, a mastery of river highways like the Volga and the Dnieper. They navigated these watery paths in their versatile longships, portaging between waterways, establishing fortified trading posts at strategic points. These strongholds, such as the ones at Novgorod and later Kiev, grew from simple way stations into centers of power, where Norse traders and warriors lived alongside, and eventually ruled over, the local Slavic tribes. Over generations, a profound fusion took place. The Rus chieftains, men like the semi-legendary Rurik, founded dynasties that would rule for centuries. They adopted Slavic customs and language, intermarried with local nobility, and their distinct identities began to blur. The result was the Kievan Rus state, a grand duchy that was neither purely Scandinavian nor purely Slavic, but a powerful hybrid. This was not a conquest that erased the existing culture, but a merger that created something entirely new. A civilization that would become the direct ancestor of modern Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus. The legacy of these Viking founders is etched into the very name of the largest nation on Earth, a permanent reminder of a time when Norsemen from the West became the princes of the East. Buried in a Norwegian clay mound, the Oseberg ship waited for over 1,000 years, a silent tomb holding one of the Viking Age's most profound mysteries. When farmers uncovered its prow in 1903, they unearthed not just a ship, but a time capsule of staggering wealth and artistry. The vessel itself was a masterpiece, a 21-meter-long seaworthy ship carved with gripping beasts and swirling patterns, a floating gallery of Norse art. But the true enigma lay in its burial chamber. 2 women had been laid to rest here with unparalleled ceremony. One was an elderly woman, perhaps in her 80s, a remarkable age for the time. The other was younger, likely in her 50s. The older woman's body was placed in the place of honor, and she suffered from advanced cancer and severe arthritis, conditions that would have left her in constant pain. Yet her burial was fit for an empress. The grave goods surrounding them were a catalog of power and prestige. There was a full set of farming tools, showing command over agriculture. There were 4 elaborately decorated sledges and a working cart, the only complete Viking Age cart ever found. The textiles included exquisite tapestries and fine clothing, and the women were equipped with personal items like 2 pairs of shoes, combs, and a small oak chest. The scale of the sacrifice was breathtaking, with more than a dozen horses and several oxen laid alongside them, a display of wealth meant to stun the living and serve the dead in the afterlife. So who were they? The leading theory suggests the older woman was Queen Asa, the grandmother of the first king of a united Norway, a formidable matriarch from the sagas. Her younger companion is the deeper puzzle. Was she a slave, sacrificed to serve her mistress forever? Or was she a relative, a priestess, or even the true power behind the throne? the one who actually wielded the authority in life. The presence of a rare, rattle-shaped object, possibly used in magical rites, hints that one of them was a Verlva, a sorceress of immense social standing. The Osberg burial forces us to confront a complex reality where a woman's power could be spiritual, economic, and political, all at once. The ship's preservation, thanks to the blue clay that encased it, gives us an unparalleled window into their world. The ornate carvings on the sledges, the posts, and the ship itself are a textbook of early Viking art, the Osberg style, filled with gripping beasts and intricate interlace. Every swirling pattern and snarling animal head was a statement, a declaration of a culture that saw beauty and power as two sides of the same finely crafted coin. This was not a hidden grave, it was a public spectacle, a monument intended to be remembered, leaving us with a question that has echoed for centuries. What story of alliance, love, power, or faith was so important it required two powerful women to make this final journey together? But the power of the runes extended beyond sacred magic into the realm of pure intellect. The Vikings developed complex systems of encrypted messages, a form of secret writing known as cipher runes. These were not the standard futhart carved for all to read, but clever codes designed to conceal their meaning from the uninitiated. One of the most ingenious systems was the branch runes, or twig runes. Imagine a single, vertical line representing a tree trunk. The secret lay in the placement and number of shorter lines, the branches, attached to this central staff. A single branch on the left side of the staff near the top might stand for one rune, while two branches on the right side near the bottom represented an entirely different character. By reading the pattern of these branches, a person who knew the code could decipher the hidden message, while to anyone else, it looked like nothing more than a series of abstract notches. Why go to such trouble? A runestone in Sweden bears a cryptic inscription that seems to be a simple memorial, but when decoded, it might reveal the true location of a hidden silver hoard, a secret known only to the family. Other ciphers could have been used for delicate political communication between chieftains, ensuring their plans remained safe from prying eyes. For a skilled rune carver, mastering these ciphers was the ultimate display of intelligence and status. It was a way of saying, I possess knowledge so valuable, I can hide it in plain sight. This practice transforms our understanding of their world, revealing a culture that valued cleverness and subtlety just as much as raw strength, where the deepest secrets were not always buried in the earth, but encoded in the very symbols they left behind for us to find. Their encrypted runes were a testament to a clever mind, but their greatest secret was a land hidden across the sea. The saga of Vinland is a story of epic discovery, a voyage that placed Norse feet on the shores of North America around the year 1000, nearly 5 centuries before Christopher Columbus was even born. The tales are preserved in 2 Icelandic sagas, the Saga of the Greenlanders and the Saga of Eric the Red. They tell of Leif Erikson, son of the fiery explorer who founded the Greenland settlement. Leif heard rumors of a land to the west, sighted years earlier by a merchant named Bjarni Herjolfsson who had been blown off course. Intrigued, Leif purchased Bjarni's ship and set out with a crew of 35 men to find this mysterious place. He first reached a flat, stone-covered land he called Helgeland, the land of flat stones, which we now believe was Baffin Island. Sailing south, he found a forested coast he named Markland, simply meaning forest land, likely modern-day Labrador. Pushing further, he finally arrived at a place with a much more enticing feature, wild grapes growing in abundance. He called it Vinland. Here, the sagas say, the grass was lush and the salmon were the largest they had ever seen. The winters were so mild that cattle could graze outdoors all season. It was a land of unbelievable plenty. For decades, this story was dismissed as pure legend, a fanciful myth with no basis in fact. That all changed in the 1960s, when a Norwegian explorer and his wife discovered the remains of a Norse settlement at El Ants Ox Meadows, on the northern tip of Newfoundland. The archaeological evidence was undeniable. They uncovered the foundations of 8 turf-walled buildings, including a longhouse, a smithy, and several workshops, all identical in design to structures found in Iceland and Greenland. Among the artifacts were a bronze cloak pin, a stone oil lamp, and the definitive proof, slag from iron working. The native peoples of the area did not smelt iron, but the Norse did. Carbon dating placed the site squarely around the year 1000, perfectly aligning with the saga accounts. El Ant's Ox Meadows was not just a camp, it was a gateway, a base for further exploration down the coast, a place they called Stromfjord in the sagas. This is where the story takes a darker turn. The sagas recount that the Norse encountered the local indigenous people, whom they called Skraelings. The word likely meant something like barbarians or weaklings, reflecting their view of these unfamiliar people. Initially, there were moments of cautious trade. The Norse would offer cloth and milk in exchange for animal pelts, but this fragile peace did not last. Misunderstandings, fear, and cultural clashes quickly erupted into violence. The Skraelings, alarmed by the newcomers, attacked. The sagas describe the terrifying sound of their hide drums and the strange projectiles they launched from catapults, likely a description of stones thrown from slings. In one fierce battle, Leif's brother, Thorvald Eriksson, was struck by an arrow and killed, becoming perhaps the first European to die and be buried in North America. This conflict, more than anything else, doomed the Norse venture. They were vastly outnumbered, and their small bands could not withstand the determined resistance of the people who had lived on that land for millennia. After only a few years, perhaps a decade at most, the Norse abandoned Vinland. They retreated back to Greenland, leaving behind their turf houses and their dream of a new colony in the west. The settlement at El Ant's Ox Meadows stands as a silent, windswept monument to a fleeting moment of contact, a bold discovery that was ultimately too far from home and too fraught with danger to last. That single, complete helmet was unearthed from a Norwegian burial mound, a silent witness to 1,000 years of misconception. Its name is the G-Germand helmet, and it stands alone as the only fully intact Viking helmet ever discovered in all of Scandinavia. Found in the grave of a powerful chieftain alongside his mail coat, swords, and spears, this is not a ceremonial piece. This is the battle-worn gear of a professional warrior from the very heart of the Viking Age. Its design is a masterclass in brutal pragmatism. Forged from iron, it is a simple, rounded cap constructed from 4 plates riveted together, with a protective guard that sweeps down to shield the nose and arches over the eyes, forming what is often called a spectacle mask. There are no horns, no wings, no decorative flourishes that would catch a blade. Every curve and rivet serves a single, stark purpose: to deflect a lethal blow away from the wearer's most vulnerable features. This single artifact, resting in a museum case, holds more truth than a century of opera costumes. It is the definitive proof, the physical key that finally unlocks the real image of a Viking warrior. When you picture that chieftain now, you see a man clad in iron and mail, his face partially hidden behind that grim metal guard, his eyes scanning the shield wall from within a shadowed, practical helm. The G-Germand helmet does not just represent a style, it represents the entire philosophy of Viking combat, where survival depended on efficiency, not theatricality. It is the final, silent verdict on the horned helmet myth, a relic that speaks with the clear, cold voice of forged iron. A horse was far more than a simple farm animal to the Vikings. It was a sacred creature that bridged the worlds of the living and the divine. The bond between a Norseman and his horse was profound, rooted in utility, but elevated to a spiritual level. These animals were essential for transportation and farm work, but their true significance was revealed in the most important rituals. During a blot, a major sacrificial festival held to honor the gods and ensure a good harvest or victory in battle, the horse was the most prized offering. A chieftain would lead a beautiful, strong horse before the assembled community, and after ceremonies asking for the gods' favor, the animal would be ritually slain. Its blood, considered powerfully holy, was sprinkled on the altars, the temple walls, and even on the people themselves to confer blessing and protection. The meat was then cooked in a great cauldron and shared in a sacred feast, a communion where the strength of the horse was believed to pass into those who ate it. This deep, pagan reverence for the horse is perfectly captured in their mythology by Sleipnir, Odin's legendary steed. This was no ordinary horse, but an 8-legged creature born of the trickster god Loki. With his extra limbs, Sleipnir could travel not only across the earth, but between the realms of the living and the dead, carrying Odin wherever his wisdom was needed. He was a symbol of ultimate speed, power, and supernatural passage. Back in the mortal world, this reverence took a more brutal form in the popular sport of horse fighting. Two specially bred stallions would be set against each other, goaded into a ferocious battle of bites and kicks. While a form of entertainment, these fights were deadly serious, with the prestige of the owner and the valuable bloodline of the victorious horse hanging in the balance. The conflict they sparked was so intense that the outcomes often led to violent feuds, showing just how deeply entwined these animals were with a man's honor and social standing. When Christianity began to spread across Scandinavia, this entire complex relationship with the horse became a battleground. The new church viewed the eating of horse meat as a particularly stubborn pagan practice, a direct link to the old sacrificial rites. Church laws were explicitly passed to forbid it, not because the meat itself was unclean, but because consuming it was an act of loyalty to the old gods. To eat horse meat was to publicly declare yourself a pagan, so the humble horse becomes a silent witness to a massive cultural shift, its body a site of conflict between an ancient world of blood sacrifices and animal gods, and a new world of crosses and commandments. The most chilling legend of the Viking Age is a ritual known as the Blood Eagle. It is described in the sagas as a method of execution so brutal it defies belief. The victim, often a high-status prisoner or a rival who had killed the perpetrator's father, was laid face down. His back was carved open with a sharp blade, the outline of an eagle etched into his flesh. Then his ribs were hacked away from his spine, one by one, and splayed outward like the bloody wings of a great bird. Finally, the saga claims, his lungs were pulled out through the wounds and draped over his broken back, where the final convulsions of the breathing organs would mimic the fluttering of an eagle's wings. It was a death meant to be a spectacle, an offering to the god Odin, the lord of the hanged, and a statement of ultimate vengeance and power. But did this horrific practice ever truly happen, or is it a myth born from fear and misunderstanding? The historical debate is as fierce as the ritual itself. Skeptical scholars argue that the blood eagle is a literary invention, a dark metaphor from skaldic poetry that was later misinterpreted by Christian scribes as a literal event. They point out that the sagas describing it were written down centuries after the Viking Age, often by monks who had every reason to paint their pagan ancestors as monstrous barbarians. In this view, the Blood Eagle was a powerful piece of anti-Viking propaganda, designed to demonize a culture that had already faded into history. Other historians, however, point to archaeological evidence that suggests such a ritual was at least physically possible. They cite the unique way the ribs connect to the spine and argue that a skilled person with the right tools could perform the gruesome act. They also note that similar forms of ritualistic back cutting and organ removal are recorded in other cultures, making it less of an impossible fantasy. The truth may lie somewhere in the fog between reality and reputation. It is possible that a form of ritual killing involving carving the back did exist, but that the saga writers, removed by time and faith, exaggerated its details into the stuff of nightmare. The Blood Eagle remains the darkest enigma of the Norse world, a symbol that challenges us to separate the terrifying reality of a warrior culture from the terrifying stories told about it. That final legacy is not buried in a field or preserved in a museum case. It lives on your own tongue every single day. The most personal and enduring secret of the Viking Age is woven into the very fabric of the English language. For centuries, the Danelaw, a vast region of England ruled by Viking law, created a melting pot of cultures where Old Norse speakers and Old English speakers lived side by side. They traded, they intermarried, and their languages began to merge. The result was a linguistic revolution that gave English some of its most fundamental words. Think of the world above you. The word sky comes straight from the Old Norse word for cloud. The word skin replaced the Old English word, while the simple, essential egg pushed out its English counterpart. The tools of daily life bear Norse names: the knife you use in the kitchen and the window, the wind eye, you look through. The very concept of law is a Viking gift, a word they carried with them to the assembly fields of England. But the most profound influence is one you have likely used without a second thought: the pronouns they, them, and their. Old English had no good solution for a third-person plural pronoun, a grammatical gap the Norsemen filled perfectly. So every time you use those words, you are speaking with a Viking accent. This was not a hostile takeover of the language, but a practical fusion, a 1,000-year-old conversation between neighbors that settled into our grammar and vocabulary. It means that the story of the Vikings is not a distant tale of ruins and artifacts. It is a story you tell with every sentence you speak. The horned helmet falls away, revealing a face of startling complexity. We have journeyed through 30 secrets, and the barbarian raider has been utterly transformed. The real Vikings were explorers whose longships bridged continents, traders whose silver connected worlds, and artists whose hands carved soul into steel and story into stone. They were innovators who navigated by hidden suns and built cities from remote camps. Their society granted women legal power we are only now fully appreciating, and their spirit of competition honed both the body in the wrestling ring and the mind over the game board. Their legacy is not a ghost from a distant past. It is the living foundation of nations from Russia to England, and it echoes in the very words you use to describe the sky above you and the law that governs you. They were a people of immense contradiction, capable of brutal slave trading and exquisite poetry, of pagan magic and Christian conversion, all within the same generation. This was the true Viking Age, a sprawling, creative, and ruthless chapter of human history that shaped our modern world in ways we are still discovering. We have pulled back the curtain on these forgotten secrets, but the conversation is just beginning. Tell us in the comments, which of these revelations reshaped your understanding the most? And if you enjoyed this journey into the depths of history, subscribe now, because countless more hidden stories are waiting to be uncovered.